So our next speaker is Marcin Kościelniak. He's coming from the Jagiellonian University in Kraków, and he's assistant professor at the theater and drama department there. And he's deputy editor-in-chief of Didaskalia journal. And his research is focused on Polish theater and on contemporary performing arts. And the title of his talk is Jacek, Kryszkowski, przepraszam bardzo, Dematerialization as a Step Beyond Culture.
I made it yesterday because I saw that everyone did so. First, I want to say thank you to the organizers of the conference, to Professor Kocielniak, and also to Bohdan Achimescu, who provided me with all information. Thank you. And I must say that I feel a bit different here, because I'm not from the field of history of art. But in a way it's interesting for me to confront my point of view with the other one, and I will be, well, all the speeches were really interesting for me. The paper I will present is part of my rehearsal project on Kultura Zrzuty, pitching culture, artistic community that was a part of underground art circle in Poland back in the 80s. This pitching culture, this name refers to the way they did art by collecting ideas together, and also in the way they lived together, like collecting money for alcohol. This paper is a case study. The subject is the work of Jacek Kryszkowski, a somewhat forgotten or a bit neglected Polish artist. The theme of dematerialization occupied an important place in his work, and a peculiar one. So this case study will be also an attempt to present specific understanding of dematerialization topic, seen from the perspective of cultural studies. In the opening part of this talk, I will outline the main premises of my examination of Kryszkowski's work and thoughts, and in the latter part, I will present one of Kryszkowski's actions in detail, one which I have selected as the fullest and most interesting instance of his concept of dematerialization. At the beginning, Kryszkowski's dematerialization was typical. It was a sign of discord with the art world. Kryszkowski graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw in 1980. He was a diploma-bearing painter. He knew the latest tendencies in Polish and world art, also the Neue Wilde and white painting, represented in Poland by his friends, Grupa from Warsaw. This perspective allows us to see an institutional critique in Kryszkowski's approach. I quote, "A fundamental question for the market is the existence or absence of the material objects we call paintings," recalls Marta Tarabula, who associated the success of the new painting in the 80s with art retailers and collectors' hunger for paintings. In 1984, Kryszkowski wrote, "You've got to paint widely because the market abhors a vacuum, and young people need ways to voice their rebellion." This might set the context for the 1985 action organized by Kryszkowski with Adam Rzepecki, titled "Let's Dispose of Polish and World Art," where they auctioned off art objects by bidding down. I quote, "The prices we got for works we made based on Warhol and or Ryszard Winiarski convinced us that we had been correct in rejecting skills that were so prized by society." Of course, we have to make a footnote concerning the Polish reality of the time. The second half of the 80s had brought only a taste of what might be called like this regular art market. This does not mean, however, that the previous art scene had not had its own special symbolic rules. Kryszkowski wrote of its, I quote, ritual selection process, promoting stars, bearing their low lives from parties and kicking them out, punishing the independent who are passed over in silence or abused. Kryszkowski specialized in crushing and infecting art events. In his report on intellectual movement of Polish art event in Lublin in 1984, we read, "For the video screenings, I unscrew some of the fuses. One of the artists had a fit. The screams of one film inspired me to rhythmically tap my foot, which the whole room picked up at once. One of the organizers went nuts. He threw himself on me." Kryszkowski concluded that the event provided evidence that flirting with the viewer to create the work only continues the old familiar game of pretensions from the 50s. As we can see, Kryszkowski's notion of challenging the art object naturally led him to a critique of artist-viewer relationship. During an appearance with his friend Janusz Banach in 1980 at Warsaw's Stodoła Gallery, Banach apparently said to the viewers, "You came to see something interesting, and I am supposed to satisfy this need of yours. But I have no intention of telling you anything interesting. The floor is yours." This sort of meeting challenged the rules of the traditional gallery experience. The point was to break the hierarchies, turning the work into the event, contemplation into participation, the viewer into a participant. Finally, Kryszkowski's fakes are a special form of challenging art close to dematerialization. Kryszkowski's archive contains 3 fake invitations to art events. Using authentic prints, he ironically attacked 3 influential institutions: Foxal Gallery in Warsaw, the Studio Art Center in Warsaw, and Józef Robakowski's private exchange gallery. In the invitation to Studio Art Center, for example, we read, "Studio invites you neither to exhibitions nor to any other such nonsense, announcing a hiatus in activities and suggesting a break from art, with a performance by Urszula Czartoryska, famous art critic, called him an employee at the storehouse of the gallery." The return to painting in Poland in the 80s was unusual. It was connected with the independent art scene that grew out of the political situation. After introducing the martial law in 1981, in opposition to the state art scene, there grew a huge independent art network held mainly in churches. Catholic Church was seen as a shelter, both for people and for national identity. Catholic national content won the day, rendered in conservative 19th century painting techniques and symbolic topics. This political context is crucial in Kryszkowski's work. From 1981 on, Kryszkowski began circulating with Kultura Rzuty, pigeon culture community, gathered around Strych, Attic, a private gallery and meeting place on Piotrowska Street in Łódź. Pigeon culture brought together seldom diploma-bearing artists who challenged both the state art network and the pro-church scene, refusing to subordinate the work to ideologies. The third way in art was firstly institutionally independent, secondly bound up with tradition of the critical art, above all Dada, and thirdly focused on challenging national Catholic content. Pure politics was secondary in Kryszkowski's work. The experience of pigeon culture was formative for him as a product of special time. He spoke of the martial law period as a hole in the culture, which released a special kind of energy and created a space for forming special relationship between people who wanted to be independent. I quote, The people in Stryk were together in turning their back on culture, he wrote. This close link between art and cultural reflection is essential on my approach to Kryszkowski. For Kryszkowski, art is only one product of culture, alongside, I quote, science, tourism, mechanization, tinkering, ceremonies, and prophets. The roles of the artist and the viewer are only two of many available to culture, like the roles of, I quote, the teacher, driver, bartender, speaker, hero, or consumer. In rejecting art, and above all, the object of art, Kryszkowski rejected culture. The great pile of shit, this is how he called the human culture. Culture for him was a range of mechanisms manipulating people, even whole societies, independent of their will. Humanity was a set of behavioral patterns acquired through socialization. Man was both an agent and a product of cultural norms. The culture was a structure guaranteed by the fulfillment of designed behavioral patterns, supervised by specialists like doctors, police officers, and artists. We now can see that Kryszkowski saw participating in the art world as reinforcing the culture, seen as a system for enslaving the individual. I quote, "We ought to discredit the system, going beyond everyday honesty, beyond morality, normalcy," he declared. Here we see a kinship with the countercultural tradition, yet Kryszkowski was closer to the cultural critics by post-structuralists like Michel Foucault or Pierre Bourdieu. The pitch-in situation, which Kryszkowski saw as a way out of culture, is not a utopia of return to a pure reality. It is a more mysterious and problematic construct marked by a concept of non-identification. In the context of making a pitch-in, Kryszkowski lists various situations where he was successful in moving beyond art, conceived as a sphere where cultural norms hold sway, moving towards situations that were spontaneous and liberated. One example was the birthday at the City Bathhouse event in 1982 in Dziekanka Gallery, where the gathered crowd and artists left Dziekanka Gallery to play football in Warsaw streets instead of presenting their work. The other example is the event in Mała Gallery, Little Gallery event in 1984 in Warsaw, when a post-Dada vehicle built for the exhibition was pushed out of the gallery. I have to speak louder. I quote, "Behind these doors, the work became an ordinary vehicle, promising everyone unpredictable and unmotivated use. Art hooliganism makes everyone cease to be viewers and participate in a spontaneous adventure. People can watch us or push along with us, and they do. The vehicle stops being a cause and almost everyone pitches in." At the same time, Kryszkowski makes us understand that this is only a poor substitute of pitch-in situation, which can't be described. It is only available to experience. He sees the phenomenon of pitch-in as beyond form. It is an event which is hard to logically justify, which is vague and uncertain. It is defined by an enigmatic value of being together. It is human behavior that has lost its significance to culture. It defines activities that culture is unable to identify. If culture is a sphere of language and definition, then the pitch-in is rejecting of culture means shifting the focus beyond language, beyond symbolic order, beyond logos. All this should make it clear why Kryszkowski did not agree with the name pitch-in culture. He said it was named out of spite because, I quote, "it had nothing to do with culture." This also makes us look at Kryszkowski's pitch-in concept as a concept that was bound to its time. In 1986, when independent artists were gradually entering back the official market, he wrote, "The culture is taking place where a person once moved freely and independently." In 1985, Kryszkowski performed an action which might be regarded as his most interesting as well as his most representative in terms of his understanding of dematerialization as an activity not only in art but in culture. This was the self-declared act of transporting Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz ashes to Poland. 1985 marked the 100th anniversary of Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz, Witkacy's birth, one of the greatest Polish avant-garde artists who committed suicide in 1939 in Jeziory, the town in Ukraine, then part of Soviet Union. UNESCO declared 1985 Witkacy year, and a national action was planned to bring Witkacy's ashes from Soviet Union back to Poland. I quote, "Efforts to transport the ashes make now no sense. I suggest aborting the mission," wrote Kryszkowski in his report from his expedition, published in his underground magazine Hula Hop in 1985. According to this report, Kryszkowski, his wife, Elżbieta Kacprzak, and his friend Mikołaj Malinowski had reached Witkacy's grave in Jeziory, unearthed the bone, minced it to take across the border to Poland. As a proof, each of 100 issues of Hula Hop had a map, a detailed map of Jeziory neighborhood, 3 photographs showing the expedition participants at the cemetery, and also a photograph of Kryszkowski digging near the grave, as here he found the bone, as well as a small portion of minced Witkacy's bone attached to the cover in a little bag. So it is this Hula Hop magazine, and in the bottom we have a bag with Witkacy's ashes. Why Witkacy? Firstly, for Kryszkowski, Witkacy was a patron for pitching. He was interested in Witkacy not as a painter, dramatist or philosopher, but as a discoverer of even off limits to history of art, of mythological sloping. In Witkacy's studies, sloping serves to describe wild improvisations on the piano. Kryszkowski picked up on this term and appropriated it, making it synonymous with pitching in. The territory of sloping is Witkacy's social life, situation created, I quote, in dive bars during nighttime sessions. Sloping involves a reality that opposes the ambitions of culture and civilization, personal contact, head-to-head meeting with other people, hanging out in undefined groups. But Witkacy mainly intrigues Kryszkowski as someone who took the process of dematerialization in culture as far as it could go. He wrote that in 1939, Witkacy vanished, happily simulating suicide. "The sweet old man has been sitting in our street for years," he wrote. Kryszkowski never equated pitching in and death, yet as a triumph of what goes beyond language, beyond the symbolic order, pitch in is of course close to a corpse. Yet the kindship is complex and problematic. For Kryszkowski, death is the scene of problematic flight from the culture because of the existence of cultural practices such as graves or monuments that try to neutralize the countercultural power of death. The grave and the burial are on the same list of cultural practices as the work of art for him. And dematerialization, ashes and decay, are part of Pichin territory as a place of non-identification. Speaking out in favor of dematerialization, decay, is speaking out in favor of what does not submit to practices of culture, and to national culture in particular. We might see this as a backdrop for the Witkacy act of bringing Witkacy's ashes to Poland. As Kryszkowski wrote, he wanted to deprive, I quote, a weary society of another chance for its euphoria and processions, which would certainly have occurred if the nation has transported the skeleton. He wrote ironically, "I salute all Poles. Finally, we've got him here with us in our homeland. That's really what we were missing. I'm sorry, I can't go on. It's so moving." Here we reach an interesting point where dematerialization equates materiality, or better, materialism. The materialization of the body, object or ashes, informs that there's nothing else left. There's nothing but matter. No symbolic, spiritual or metaphysic value, well, no soul. We can see now that Kryszkowski's action was purely political, especially in Polish Catholic context. The antimony I have sketched is based on the conflict between the ritual, symbolic body and the corpse, the object. The thing is that it cannot be maintained for long because of the questionable status of the material in the little plastic bags. In 1994, Kryszkowski's report on his expedition to get Witkacy's ashes was reprinted in art magazine Sztuki. From then on, Kryszkowski's journey has intrigued artists and scholars like Waldemar Rzeszkiewicz, Jerzy Truszkowski, Ewa Domańska. The event became part of few exhibitions and went down in art history. The expedition became an artistic, historical and academic fact, and Kryszkowski's report and documents are the source of its reconstruction. This is in spite of doubts whether the ashes Kryszkowski brought to Poland are authentic ashes of Witkacy. Waldemar Rzeszkiewicz's article from the 90s suggests that research was carried out on the ashes in the bags, confirming that they belong to, I quote, the remains of the skeleton of a man over 50 years of age who had spent the appropriate amount of time in damp ground. So that was the main argument to prove the authenticity of all this action. I have made contact with Rzeszkiewicz, who responded to my question in March 2016. I quote, "Information about research confirming the authenticity of the remains came, of course, from Kryszkowski." What's interesting is that no one from many people who dealt with Kryszkowski's action, writing science work on it, or including its documentation into exhibitions, no one ever met with other participants of expedition. In March 2016, I met with Elżbieta Kacprzak, the wife of Kryszkowski. Hear what she told me. "I didn't return to that for a long time. A year ago, I read about it on the internet. It amused me that everyone took it seriously. I wanted to say something about this, then I dropped it, and now you've shown up. You're the first person I'm telling it. There was no expedition. It was a mystification. And then, we made Witkacy's grave together. It was a set designed in a garden at a friend's house outside of Warsaw. We made it for the purpose of the documentation. The gravestone was made of cardboard stuck with the sand. First we coated it with glue, then poured sand on it so that it stuck. Everything was planned. And the ashes in the bags, we ground up animal bones. Mikołaj Malinowski, another participant in the expedition, whom I met in May 2016, gave an identical version of the events. Their testimony confirmed the fact that in 1992, Kryszkowski donated a canvas to the Museum of the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw that seems to be a fragment of Witkacy's grave, the top fragment. And it's made like the method like Elżbieta Kacprak described. Dematerialization as a special technique in art and culture mingles with mystification strategies, and together they work against culture. Here the culture of archive. I quote, "The photographs, record of the trip, and the map seem to indicate the truth," Kryszkowski wrote. After Alan Sekula, we might say that Kryszkowski's action demonstrates how, I quote, "photography constructs an imagined world and presents it as real, while showing how it helps to justify and normalize existing power relation. Photography archives uphold the hidden link between knowledge and power. Using his will to undermine the culture of the archive, Kryszkowski rejected authority, the power of symbolic father, to use Piotr Piotrowski's phrase for Zbigniew Libera's famous work based on mystification, Master on Positives. It's important because Zbigniew Libera was part of Pichin community and he knew Kryszkowski and his work, of course. There was an exhumation, an official funeral in Zakopane for Witkacy in 1988, so 3 years after this exhibition. It shiftily turned out that instead of Witkacy's ashes, they had transported the bones of young women. The mistake was made because the graveyard in Jeziory was demolished and they did not know where to dig. Without sharing the results of my investigation, I asked an outstanding Witkacologist, Janusz Degler, about the role of Kryszkowski in the history of bringing Witkacy's ashes to Poland. On 5th of September, he wrote to me, "I recall that the business of Kryszkowski profaning Witkacy's grave appeared in conversation with Ministry of Culture and Art employees in early March 1988. It was said that the Soviet side did not anticipate the presence of any scientists or specialists from the Polish delegation at the cemetery. One reason was the profanation of the grave and the desecration of the remains by 3 Poles in spring of 1985, as proven by a paper that described an entire event, attaching a little bag containing minced bones taken from the grave. This means," said Janusz Degler, "that no one of us were in the government delegation traveling to Jeziory. If any of us were there, we would surely have averted the horrible error." So we might say that Kryszkowski indeed deprived the nation of its euphoria. His expedition to get Witkacy's ashes was a performative act and a triumph of Pichin over culture. As Janusz Degler said, I quote, "Kryszkowski served Witkacy well because he continues to lie in a small Orthodox cemetery with a lakeside view when he was buried in 1939. In the 80s, Kryszkowski gradually withdrew from the art scene. In 1990, he abandoned art altogether. He died in 2006. We might say that his rejecting of art and his escape from the culture was successful at last, but as we now know, is not certain even after death. Jacek Kryszkowski, artist, painter, that's what we can read on his grave. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcin. I love that story. I was hoping you'd talk about the woman at the end. We're just getting some things switched out over the next couple minutes, but the last speaker in the panel will be Bohdan Achimescu. And he, as you know, I'm sure, is a visual artist. He's assistant professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Kraków in the intermedia department. Right? And he works in a variety of media, including drawing, printmaking, installation, video, digital arts, and text. And he explores themes of genetic inheritance, political dystopia, and imaginary architecture and artifacts. He represented Romania at the 49th Venice Biennale in 2001 as part of the Context Network. And he's going to talk to you today under the title De-Materialization, Rematerialisation, Utopia, Corruption, a story of the Fine Arts High School in Timișoara. Did I say that well?
Yeah.
Timișoara, okay. So.
The projector finally gets to rest. I'm going to install my own. Because this needs to be close to the screen, I'm going to look a little bit like Kaczynski here. thank you first for this great invitation, and I'm glad I could come with the students of the intermedia department of the Fine Art Academy. It's one of the several collaborations Professor Paulus started with the Academy of Fine Arts, so we're glad that we can bridge the gap, if there is one, between practice and theory. Oh, hang on, I don't have a title. Paweł Brożyński, to whom I owe a lot of inspirations, suggested that I start with some words about Romania, the country that I go back to when I think about the first 25 years of my life. I also know that some of you are for the first time in any Eastern European country. David Summers has confessed that he's never been more eastwards than he is now. But instead of showing you some photos, I thought I would start my presentation with two small stories, and I'm going to turn a timer on because I have a tendency to digress and I don't want to. I want to give you some background information, and I don't want to be a substitute for Wikipedia. So I'm going to give you information that's not available elsewhere. And here's the first story, and I'm giving myself 5 minutes for this one. The mother of a colleague of mine by the name of Maria Malacek, coming from a family of Slovaks, partly Italian, that's how mixed ethnicity used to be, was living in a town called Ocelu Roșu, which means red steel. I'm going to just draw Romania for you. This is about it. This is the Danube Delta, the Danube. There's Hungary, and Poland is somewhere here. Well, I compressed a little bit. The two countries used to be closer together, and Czernowice, the city where the person you were talking about ran away through, is here. Anyway, she was the secretary in a steelwork in Ocelu Roșu, and at some point during the communist dictatorship, she decided to make an anti-system prank. The prank consisted of writing a letter. I guess that would mean it was mail art, but anyway, writing a letter, a poem actually, personally, as a letter personally to Nicolae Ceausescu. It was an interesting initiative because we only know about it through her story, and it wasn't published in any way, so it didn't have any potential to harm the dictator in a PR way. But because nobody was naive, she knew full well that ownership of typewriters was regulated at the time. And if you had a typewriter, as we know, I don't know who of you knows the story of the QWERTY keyboard the order of the keys is given by a logic of the hammers that were striking the paper, and the frequency of letters appearing in a language was governing the order in which these hammers strike. Each typewriter has imperfections, mechanical imperfections of the little hammer. So if you look under a magnifying glass at a text, and if you have an entire database of texts written by every typewriter in the country, you can actually track down who wrote it. By the way, you have to know that printers now have this feature. They put yellow dots in places that you don't know, but they're tied to the serial number of the printer. So in case you want to send ransom letters, don't use a printer you pay with a credit card for. But there's another feature to this whole system, and or another possibility of tracking, and that's connected to the fact that skilled typists have, because of muscular memory and I don't know, some anatomical characteristics, have a certain strength with which they hit each key. So, for instance, that they will hit the O key with a certain strength. The longer the text is, the more precisely you can recognize the actual person that typed. This is the 80s. Because we all knew about this from Radio Free Europe, Mrs. Malachek, who was a skilled typist, bandaged her hand to affect her typing pattern. Right? So all of this was just for a prank. I suppose she must have been very satisfied afterwards. And the epilogue of this episode turned out quite well for her. Of course, the secret police arrived at the factory astonishingly fast, although she mailed the letter without a return address. She was not crazy. And although she never published a copy or anything, as a matter of fact, she didn't even keep a copy. So I don't suspect her of the same level of sophistication you were telling about. So this is true. I'm sure about this. This is a simple woman from a provincial town who later went on to marry. Anyway, doesn't matter. And even though she was made to, along with every other person that had access to that particular typewriter, to submit sample after sample, they never quite managed to discover who did it. I tell you this story because I wanted to illustrate the unusual level of attention that was directed in that time in Romania towards any form of dissent, even towards a form that didn't really have any sort of possible consequence. Once she moistened that envelope and sent it, and sealed it and threw it in the mail, there was no other consequence but her telling this story to us during a skiing trip 10 years later. The other story I want to say as an illustration, and I've already used up too much on my intro time, but I'll try to fast forward it, is related to an institutional form of practicing art, which consisted of being a member of an artist union. And that form of practicing art supposed you had maybe a studio sponsored by the state, you were meeting other artists. Strangely, if they were from abroad, you needed to call an artist union official to be present at the meeting. Anyway, But there were two forms of art that were deemed acceptable, and at the same time acceptable both by the authorities and by somebody who wanted to maintain some level of personal hygiene. And both these forms of art were decorative. One of them was just geometrical motifs, and the other one was representational art of the kind that could maybe decorate the walls of a dacha. This representational art was derided with the term pictura de gang, which basically means corridor painting. Because at the time the country was slipping into the paranoia of dictatorship, a lot of strange things were happening. Among others, the birthdays of the dictator and his wife were elevated to the rank of national holidays. A specialist was coming to each artist union in each județ, which in Polish would translate as województwo, and would communicate details of the taste of the dictators, or perhaps changes. The first she-comrade, probably I have to call her, she wasn't the first lady, preferred yellow, brown, and dead pheasants were her favorite accessory for still life. These paintings were mass-produced, and even later, as students of the Art Academy, there were very strong attempts to sort of form us into this type of mold, because along with these events I was describing you, themes or homework was handed out in schools, and I myself had to do all kinds of strange things. Anyway, well, you know, maybe I'll tell you about one of them. I sort of slipped out of making a painting that was meant to have the same. I assure you that I had better skills at the time. Had to have the same fate of being sent to one of the residencies as a gift from the Art Academy, by making a deliberate mistake in it, and by feigning idiocy. It wasn't that hard later. It was a visit to the shipyard where Comrade and his wife were giving precious indications, and I made a huge crane with a hook just over her head. There's something tragic about me having to do this thing, and that's probably going to be the rest of my talk here, because I was a little bit better educated than that to spend my time doing this kind of stuff. And I was, because in my town there was a school called Liceu de Arte Plastice, but I think would translate that as visual art. The term of sztuki plastyczne doesn't have a direct, I think, complete equivalent. And this school was briefly, between 1970 and 1974, in the hands of a group of people known as the Sigma Group, of which one was Konstantin Flondor, well, nice writing. The other one was Stefan Bertalan, known maybe to the Krakow public because, a show featuring his works, the works of Ion Grigorescu and of another artist from Bucharest, who were shown in the Bunker Gallery about 8 years ago maybe. And then others. These are the main teachers. This group of people had this utopian idea of creating a program and sneaking it in past censorship and past all these pheasants somehow. And the idea came to their heads, I think, after they participated in the constructivist Biennale in Nuremberg in 1969. And they constituted this group just after coming from there, and then they figure out a way of arguing that the new social economical realities of a country that was industrializing itself, or at least pretending to do so, required a new type of art education. And they created an industrial design program, and in the presence actually of the ambassador of the United States, they made an exhibition in Bucharest. Just like in Poland, a lot of things you have to run by the capital to make sure that they work. And also present was, and perhaps more importantly, Mircea Malița, who was then the culture minister. And with big effort, they did a lot of mock-ups of buildings in small scale, and a lot of objects that were combining geometry inspired maybe by natural shapes and so on, to convince them to allow for an experimental curriculum to be implemented in the school. Once they succeeded, somehow they succeeded, and this experiment flew under the radar until somebody noticed this is not quite kosher enough to exist, for 4 years. But interestingly, the layout of the schooling system at the time in Romania was such that you were part of this lyceum between the ages of 11 and 18, that gave each student 8 full years to be immersed in this type of experimental program. And when they were denied this experimental status, they switched fronts somehow and managed to still continue some of its elements. So I was able to benefit from it between 1976 and 84. And the interesting thing about this post-experiment time was that the ideas that were at the basis of this experiment, which derived from texts by Kandinsky, but also Johannes Itten, or Paul Klee, by the way, translated by the artist Stefan Bogdan and his wife, who were ethnically German, so they could put this knowledge of this language to work. They resulted in the creation of a program that incorporated all kinds of very interesting events, among others the Praktici de Vară, which meant summer praxis, which were 2 weeks each year in which the students were immersed in nature around the theme. And I'm going to reuse this towel. one of the staples of the activity of Romanian actionists, because most of these teachers were Romanian actionists, was functioning in sort of impromptu mini republics created around a short project, and then not really having public look at these actions, often with the camera, in that time a Super 8 film camera, as the only trace of what was happening, but sometimes not even that. And the material they were using was whatever they could get their hands on. At some point they convinced a factory that we need paper, and they gave us a roll, I remember, that was 1 kilometer of paper, 1,000 meters of paper. And this roll was a never-ending source, I don't know how I should call it, inspiration. Anyway, we were sneaking in the school and doing something with this paper. And during one event where the camera was not present, we had used already almost all of it, and we threw it off a hill, and it unrolled for hundreds of meters. And we were looking at it, not really knowing what to do next, when we noticed a troop of cows coming, and for some reason they were staring at it like they were looking, some astronomers looking into a black hole. My theory is that they had never actually seen a surface that even. I mean, they were just used to looking at grass. And this was happening in a village of Gurahons. And then they were hesitating until, they made us look really attentively at them. And I somehow, not only I, but all of us, we didn't seize the moment. I didn't photograph this, but on my retina is still imprinted this surprisingly agile jump that the first cow did over that paper. They just didn't want to step on it. And in that noon light, it got imprinted in my memory. This is what I'm describing is a slightly silly joy of a 16-year-old doing all kinds of things. But there was a second layer to that, because procedurally speaking, our teachers had introduced not only themes, but also a new method of working where authoritarianism didn't have its place. So they were working together with us. Now, with the benefit of the distance and of the cynicism one accumulates with time, I now see this maybe a little bit differently, because I notice elements in this method where they were a little bit too, for once I have the German word klug for my taste. They were a little bit too smart, because they were engaging us in actions that they were later marketing as their own and using us as labor, basically. But for the time, it was really interesting. So one of the things we were doing with this paper was participating, although we didn't know it at the time, in a project that was protesting the cutting of trees, and which meant turning this sheets of this paper into stencils, cut out along the lines of drawings representing trees that we made, and then going to the actual place in the city where these trees were cut away, and using these the shadows created like these to create temporary patterns, like the negative of a shadow, basically. So a shadow made of light, right? that was representing the histories. As I said, a lot of these actions were being filmed, and documentation abounds, but in drawers. It's a relatively undocumented time. In fact, just like the so-called Sovietologists were not able to predict the fall of the Soviet Union, none of us, including our teachers, could predict the fall of the network of dictatorships, or certainly not its timing. And documenting work seemed irrelevant because there was not really a market that you could show it to. Making work that doesn't really have a market bothered no one at the time, so the documentation in a way has not been really made available. It's one of the reasons why I was calling that design program a utopia, because it was just a gimmick to get this program going. There wasn't really a market for design. Products were not competing. People familiar with the history of Polish poster must have the same feeling towards, you know, the whatever sense it might have made to advertise something. It was just, the Polish poster was disconnected from there was no breathing of the accountant over the shoulder of whoever was making these posters. But if one thinks of what I just described here as a sort of a normality, because it's normal that art schools function the way I described, it was always in competition with another type of normality, and that other type of normality was the normality proposed by the regime. Now, for instance, discussing the very idea of dematerializations made sense within this normality. After all, one of the artists active during that period was Paul Nagu, who we all were very interested in what he was doing, because he was doing tactile sculptures where one had to put their hands into something like a little drawer. It was a box, and then feel the object without actually looking at it. But these type of people like him, or also like Roman Kotoshman, another member of this loose associations, were quickly absorbed by the normal world. He just met a curator and made an exhibition, I think, in the Serpentine Gallery, and then he was gone because Richard DeMarco just invited him to Great Britain, and never came back. So the pressure of the normality of the dictatorship that was going gradually crazy started making our teachers crazy. And what I will try to quickly describe now is the way this school, this is it, is being now sold, and it's going to be demolished, and there's going to be a mall here soon. This was the school, and it was really interesting because here was another quite beautiful building. These are large buildings, by the way. That was the school for the hearing impaired. At the time we were calling them deaf and dumb. The school for the deaf and dumb was here, and this was the Fine Arts High School. And the person who was the most idealistic from this entire group was Stefan Bertalan, and he his evolution was really interesting, because from inspirations of the type I was describing, were inspirations from Fluxus and from Bauhaus and so on. He went on to something that resembled more expressionism. And he acquired the reputation of a crazy man. Towards the end of his life, being diagnosed with schizophrenia and then treated. And he had an obsession, like all of us, I guess, that he's being followed. And this obsession was becoming too pervasive. Of course, it was making his life a little bit difficult, because people would start to not want to get in touch with him. And I have to say that I've been reassessing this obsession years after, and one of the things he kept saying is that he finds half-smoked cigarettes in his apartment, where he wasn't even a smoker. They were in an ashtray that he was keeping just for guests, but he didn't have guests. So, what you also have to remember that this is the same city where Herta Müller was living and writing, and just as a funny trivia, she was the neighbor of my father. She lived just two stores up. He didn't know then that she's going to get a Nobel Prize. He would have probably have invited her for coffee, and she would have declined because she would have hated his wife, who was a much hated journalist. Anyway, she was saying that she was finding her paintings taken off the wall and put on the couch in a very improbable position. There was no way they would have fallen there. Had they fallen from their nail, they would have fallen after well, she wrote this actually. And then later I read a book by Luke Harding, who was reporting on Putin's Russia, and he was saying all kinds of things, like he was reporting from Moscow, and he was coming back home and finding all his windows wide open, or maybe being woken up in the middle of the night by a cell phone that was ringing, and it wasn't his cell phone. Somebody was just planting cell phones and waking him up using them. So, did somebody smoke in Stefan Bertalan's house? I don't know, but he has descended into this kind of situation, while others have joined artistic movements that were, I don't know whether they were really realizing it, that they were buying into a certain nationalist historic hallucination that continues even now, and that has its beginning in a project that was aligning somehow communism and nationalism. And so I was observing with sadness that teachers who were making us read meteorology and Hindu texts, and asking us to, while we were, I don't know, 14 years old, to build our own cosmologies and discern between the subjective perception and I don't know, of the sky, or debate on how we could imagine the sky touching or not touching the earth, or anyway building models and so on. And now they moved to a really tacky version of religious national painting. But that was not my problem anymore, because in the meantime I have, how much time do I have?
None.
None.
But we have plenty of time.
I'll shorten it. Because in the meantime, I had become a student of the Art Academy in Cluj, and where we had all these interesting debates and between making copies from Paolo Uccello and discussing all kinds of texts, as I said, but not only including these modern texts, but also Cennino Cennini or Leonardo's observation. We were invited on the first day of my studies on a bridge over the river Somes, and our teacher, well, I thought, cool, he's taking us out in nature, just like in the Fine Arts High School. And our teacher said, well, we're going to talk about perspective. And he said, listen, look at this view. Do you notice something interesting? I noticed a lot of blocks of flats, and I wasn't sure what he meant. Well, he said, look, they're all 4 stories high, but the ones that are closer look bigger, and the ones that are further away appear smaller. And I remember I was so insulted by the stupidity of this proposition that I just walked away, bought matches, and set fire on absolutely all the trash cans that I could find in the region. Incidentally, this is the same bridge where I was later meeting somebody who wanted to tell me about how he was followed, or maybe he thought that he was followed, because this was a place with a lot of ambient noise, and he thought we wouldn't be recorded. I have more, but
well,
perhaps.
I cut Eric off, very cruelly.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. Sure. You're at time now, so.
I will not take it. I just will finish by saying that I should have known what awaits me there. The people that did this utopia I told you about, there's a lot more to that. They paid for it by going crazy, each in their own way. We paid for it by being subjected to an admission exam, a very, very tough one, where we had to basically train a little bit like Chinese gymnasts from a film I have seen. We had our clock set, and we were paying for a model to sit for us. This is her. I couldn't draw like that at the time. Yeah. And the clock was ringing in a really brutal way because we wanted to have a simulation, and we were working on these strange pieces of furniture. I don't know whether we have them in art schools in Poland. It's a piece of furniture where you sit like on a horse, and you draw this. This was an informal situation. We were paying for both this training and everything, and our teachers were aware that we were being formed into basically socialist realist painters. And I remember Stefan Betalan once came, and he was so frustrated with this that he took his shoe off, and he took a sock, and he used his own sock to wipe off the entire drawing of somebody who was basically asking him how to draw to be admitted in the Fine Art Academy. And I learned how to draw. It was important to be admitted. It was really simple. You had to have composition schematics in your head, like the so-called dynamic composition, the static composition, and then whether you got a theme that involved workers at the steelwork, you just put this. This could also be a flag, depending on what, and the horse could be a king's horse, but then you could also put a plow behind that position. So, yeah, I think this is it.
questions. I'm going to make sure we leave time for Bausch to make some concluding remarks and wrap things up. So maybe we have like half an hour now to discuss what we just heard and anything else that we've heard over the last 24 hours plus. I'll just say one thing, because I don't have a prepared presentation of a summary. It was not my task, but I've been interested as an American scholar to hear all of you and a couple of Americans too, but the context of moving the borders of historiography around in ways that for me have been really telling. Magda spoke yesterday, which she's doing something else right now, but when she spoke yesterday about Jewish art historiography, I'm talking about you. It was really interesting to me as a historian of, East Central European art and architecture in an academy where there is no space for it, really doesn't exist. To do this at a moment where we're talking about issues of circulation and, I'll just use the term very loosely, dematerializing the boundaries of historiography away from essentialist art histories to something else, to study networks, to study the interrelationships of things from one to the next. And you were speaking, Monica, yesterday about the connections between nuclear physics and art. I mean, there's ways in which the boundaries have become flexible such that the historiography is also changing. So even from the standpoint of where I'm coming from, I've been questioning the last 24 hours or so, should I even be specializing in East Central European art history? I mean, right now I'm writing an essay on this, making a case for it, because I was asked to do that for something else. And the reasons, you were talking yesterday about the reasons for the closing down of dialogue about this so-called lesser art, primitive art, so forth. And what you just talked about in terms of this dual track of activity, which you summed up beautifully in this last character of all of this. To me, it makes me want to ask everyone else about the conditions under which those limits happen, because those are really culturally specific and time, space specific. And everyone's, quoting all the same people, reading all the same texts, so forth, more or less. In this room, we're having a coherent conversation about all the things you've been talking about. But when confronted with the reasons that historiography is shaped as it is, I'm forced to go back to, say, Jan Białostocki, who we've been talking about too among us, a couple of us. And the way he talks about vernacular arts, and it's like he was doing what to Eastern European art, his conception of it, what, say, Gombrich was doing to the Jewish art in that book, by saying, vernacular arts is sort of what we have. It's a dilution of what was in the center, now we're out in the periphery, and it's so-called inferior art. It's almost like he undercuts his own project. I have a lot of respect for Białostocki, but I can't help but see in the dilution of the discussion of form, a kind of, a sort of a negative dematerialization, negative in the sense that it has a negative pejorative. And I don't know, maybe this is just something I see because I'm on the outside, and I don't know how anyone else thinks about it, from the standpoint of your own perspectives as Poles or other, wherever you're coming from. Anyway, it was sort of a footnote to a lot of the things that I've been thinking about because of the nature of the papers in the last few days, and if I think about what brings us together, I'm sure you all have more to say than I do, so I'll stop. So who has questions for the last speakers or the last set of ideas you've been thinking about later?
I have one very short, concrete question for you, and then maybe something about what you're talking about, peripheries and centers, if I understood you correctly. Just out of curiosity, this Sigma project, did that have anything to do with Alexander Trocki's Sigma projects that you know?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. It was the name of the project was related to the number of the people who were engaged in the group.
So there's no center periphery dynamic there. But with this media happening, I was very struck by the fact that at a certain moment, historians of contemporary art, particularly American historians of contemporary art, had to acknowledge that that there were things happening in Argentina way before so this dematerialization set in New York, and we have the first media manifesto coming out of Argentina in 1966, I think.
7. Masota? You mean Masota?
Yeah, and so and this was a fake happening. It was completely contrived for the media, with fake photographs and everything. Was presented as a press release and put out there, and so it was also a comment from Argentina also about sort of media discourses coming from America. So I think actually it could be very productive to think about that situation, this sort of under the discourse of modernization in Argentina versus what this performance, which is also dealing with some kind of notion of pseudo event, right? I mean, I don't know if that's getting to partially what you were talking about.
In societies where centers and privies don't have to exist anymore anyway. I mean, that's kind of an outdated.
But particularly through this media discourse.
Did you want to say something? Who else is? Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe just adding to that, there's the history of the pseudo-events that would be also somewhat playing with the central periphery problem in Polish art of the 70s would be broader. For example, fake invitations for the fake visit of Andy Warhol made by Henryk Gajewski in the Warsaw Gallery, that are kind of in the vein of kultura zruta and of certain Fluxus practices, because people were invited and there was nothing, you know, in this place. As for example, in some of the Fluxus festivals, where the brass band would be driving people somewhere outside, and that's it. You have to go back. I think that this touches this peculiar, it's called blind spot of the contact between avant-garde, between center and the periphery. Because, for example, yesterday we touched a few times that in the late 50s there would be great influx of a great mass of presentation of art from the Central and Eastern Europe in the West. I think it was in the discussion after Veronica's lecture, after Victoria's lecture, and that was the moment when many exhibitions were organized and this relations somewhat changed. But later, you had later it was so sporadic, so erratic, so incoherent that you had to organize fake events to somewhat bring the ideas of dematerializing art and events into the institutions that were here.
Those are great examples, actually. Who else has a comment or question? Filling the void.
It would be rather interesting commentary, and that of course we have some kind of topic, a common topic which appears. I mean, for instance, the social and political situation which affected the attitude towards materiality due to the political reasons. And every time, of course, in the socialist bloc of countries in a different way in every decade. For instance, as you mentioned, kultura zrzuty, it would be also nice to, let's say, write more and analyze the connection between, of course, political control and dematerialization. I mean, of course, some special conditions. For instance, of course, kultura zrzuty had created an underground newspaper, which was, of course, made on a bad, ugly paper with some trashes, of course, but it was published only in 299 numbers because the censorship law, let's say, allowed some small amount of things which were published under 300, right, or something like that, or 200. So some artists searched some possibilities to avoid this law or create things which were which were easier to hide somewhere simply, or we also said about different attitudes of artists towards policy, and it's also interesting that Kryszkowski was against Tadeusz Kantor very much, and he also had this because Tadeusz Kantor was somehow was engaged in the official culture in the 80s, so he also created and some special action of shooting him symbolically by using a toy rifle, right?
But it's also probably fake.
Yes, so it was also a kind of a myth.
Produced by Zbigniew Liberec.
And I'm interested in the differences between, let's say, situation, of course, in Romania and in Poland, because I also firstly thought about Herta Müller and the Secret Service intervention in her private flat of slightly changing things, which created a huge paranoia, and the attention paid to things was, let's say, different, and let's say the acting of secret policy was also different in Poland. I mean, stereotypically, I think that in the 80s, secret police came in Poland to make revisions, throwing out things everywhere, to make it, let's say, aggressively. And in Romania, it was the kind of a psychological pressure.
But it was both, right?
So if you can, let's say, something maybe a little bit more about these differences, because I suppose that this control was much more strict, and let's say the focus on the objects and also artistic objects was far more simply, and created more pressure on artists.
Well, I'm gonna answer because I don't have an abstract from mind, so I'm going to answer maybe a little bit more anecdotally to this. In a way, I was thinking about parallels during your presentation yesterday, and socialist realism never quite ended in Romania the same way it ended here, and it also had a sort of an acid reflux in '72. So if you compare this with I'm gesturing that way because that's where I was sitting, but when I mentioned that this experimental program was happening between '70 and '74, and then was slowly dying until about '78, and then it was gone. In 1972, Ceausescu had a speech that's now known as the Mangalia thesis, that was prompted by a film that he didn't like, that was censored, and that was then read by everybody, was reading his lips, and basically everyone that had any sort of power was all that they were doing. They were reading his lips and implementing what he was saying, and that gave the signal to the commencement of a new phase of socialist realism, where this mystical, mythological, hagiographical elements were put in the service of a new vision of systemic communism that he had, and that he partially maybe shared with Tito, which was very rooted in nationalism in reality. And this is actually continuing. So maybe this is too much information, but this is continuing up until now, because as soon as this direction was given that the artists need to be the singers that sing praises of the people, of the great history, and blah blah blah, and everything, a new breed of magical pseudo-surrealism appeared that was mixing sometimes unicorns with communist leaders and on really completely crazy, huge paintings, paint, and that continues even now. And the ideology that was behind this has become known as proto-chronism. I don't know whether this is maybe a mechanical translation into English, and it doesn't quite transmit the Romanian word, but it basically meant the creation of a fake story of the origins of the Romanian nation, and just maybe it actually eliminated everything from the history that didn't fit into the theory that we are the children of the so-called ducks, not the ducks, but the ducks, the nation that was part of the Thracian tribes and the Romans. And interestingly, the guy that was financing all of this is now dead. Italian billionaire that was originating from Romania, that left Romania just after the war for good reason, because he was a Nazi, and he was anyway, he was the publisher of Ceausescu's works abroad later, and they started this entire movement. So this is specific to Romania, and also, you know, I don't want to extend this too much, but dissent was a hobby that was shared by very few people. So there wasn't a phenomenon like here in Poland. Like you know, we're all irritated sometimes with the Catholic Church. Well, wait until you get to know the Orthodox Church. It's like about 70 times worse, to the point where Virgil Hurazano called it the sixth directorate, referring to the 5 existing ones of the Securitate, because it was completely infiltrated, and they had not even the role you were telling about in your lecture. So as a person that was anti-systemic, absolutely had nowhere to go. There wasn't a movement really there.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add something, what came to my mind, because in the early 70s, and maybe till the beginning of the 80s, there was always a sort of rumorous reception of what was going on, especially in Romania, with the performing arts. I'm not sure whether this was similar to with the reception of Polish, but it was, when I remember a performance of Basom Rock, who is a sort of art historian but performing artist as well at that time. And before he began, there were rumors telling about what is going on in these Eastern countries. It's much, much better than what we dare hear. And nobody knew exactly what, but it was this creation of something incredible. And when it came to Selbstverletzung, hurting your own body, that was a myth. I mean, I think that in the West there was this, at least in West Germany, in comparison to East Germany, where nothing happened, in our view, they were so creative, all your countries, and they were even daring to bring themselves to death. And I just wanted to add that there is a rumor that was a sort of, we call it das andere, where you can have an exoticism of a very special way. I don't know how that was transferred, by what sort of media or migrating people.
You want to make a comment?
Just a quick comment. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, both you and probably Bogdan is more familiar with Piotrowski's book on Geniality. Have you read this book? Because, yeah, so I was just wondering, because this is the first and the only kind of a synthetic analysis of art and avant-garde after 1945 in Eastern Central Europe, and it was actually, for those interested, relating to your question about what was going on at that time in performative arts, well, performance and a variety of other issues. It was published in English by Reaction Books, so it's available. It's a great book, and there's a lot about Romanian art, of course, and but it includes almost. Piotrowski does not talk about Russia, because that's a slightly different case, but he includes all the countries there, and it's a great read and a very insightful book. So, yeah, and I wanted to ask you what you think about, because he mentioned artists that you also mentioned in your talk, Beltran, or what's it?
Stefan Beltran.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, Grigorescu, who is the artist who did a lot of performative work as well. So, yeah, just a recommendation.
Yeah, there's a big project going on in Basel, in Switzerland, about this connections at the moment. Yeah.
All right.
If I may add something. First, sorry for my English. I've first spoken for years in English. But lately there was a Claire Bishop book, Artificial House, published, translated into Polish. It's quite a fresh book. And so she deals also with some Eastern European art from 70s. And what she says, well, she wants to discuss the subject of political engagement of artists back in the 70s, and she says that it's not artists who really, well, fighted for independence or freedom with communists is what she's interested in, but the artists who protected their privacy. And she said that in communist countries where the power of communists was so strong, the main goal of artists was to protect the privacy. And so what we can see there is the fantasy, pure fantasy of what Eastern Europe is. Because every country was completely different. Of course, in a way they were similar, but they were completely different. As for Catholic Church in Poland, this power who enslaved people back in the 70s, 80s, and of course now, was also Catholic Church. It was even stronger. Of course, people seek the refuge in churches, and well, that's what we have debts and we have to pay them back. That's what Piotrowski said in one of his books. And so this is, well, the comment to what you asked, that this is not one.
No.
Yeah, but sometimes it seems like this also in Poland. And let's say I deal mostly with history of theater. For example, this topic of theater in relation to Catholic Church wasn't really taken under consideration. So yeah, that's it.
May I just first of all, we should not talk about Central Eastern or Eastern European countries as a whole. And all of these regimes were different, and the situation, political situation, and the degree of freedom, whatever you, well, and different political structure which enabled certain artistic activities was the dynamic, historical dynamic was very much different. So Romanian art and Polish art and Hungarian art, that these are very, very different issues. So this is an important thing. And another issue is that even the bishop says that it was about protecting artists' privacy. This protection of artist privacy under communism, generally speaking, was also a political act. They were not supposed to do that. There is this performative action by Sanja Ivekovic, for example, who was sitting on a balcony in Belgrade, as far as I remember, and she was smoking Marlboro and drinking good whiskey, while there was a official parade down the street. And she knew she was being observed because there were a lot of different secret agents on rooftops and observing her. She was doing she was using her privacy, so to say, in her own private space, but there was no such a thing as private space, in fact. That's why if you wanted to protect your private space, it just meant that you were, in a way, against the communist regime, which sort of appropriated privacy. That's basically what I'm saying is that all these little actions, which seem to be like this sort of rather internal rather than external, or private rather than political, were in fact political. And so, just a footnote to that.
Just a very short comment. I would like to express my jealousy for having this privilege of being a part of such a great and inspirational school. I mean, the high school.
One more thing, very briefly. People were talking about center and periphery. To my point of view, the avant-garde looks to me like an international style. And the sources are shared, the model monuments are shared, and there are variations. It seems to me that a significant artist could pop up anywhere. And it seems to me that the common denominator within this international style, which of course has its regional variants, but the common denominator is opposition to power and opposition to existing political power. And so I think to sum all of that up, I would say that I don't think you would want. I don't think that late modernists or contemporary art people would want to give up the idea that it is a kind of international style and allow it to regionalize. It's a much more powerful and valuable force if it does not regionalize, even though I would say significant artists can emerge out of this anyway.
Well, not because maybe my memory works in this way. I'm gonna just react in reverse order. The interesting thing about what you said and how it relates to these experiences is that all this movement, however you might call it, whether you use the name of a group or just this phenomenon I was talking about, or maybe you call it Romanian actionism, is is an effort to introduce synchronicity across borders, but it does it by actually closing art in a small group. So by cultivating interactions in small groups, and these were interactions in really small groups. A lot of the actions we were doing had no witnesses. By creating this space, you create this synchronicity even without the internet. And of course, it was a privilege to be part of it, but just, you know what the mom said to the pilot, don't fly too high so you don't hurt yourself. And, you know, the higher you fly, then the more it hurts when the other side hits you. And for a kid that was exposed to classes called bionics, for instance, or spoken to about Max Benze or something like this, to be forced to do social realist painting at the age of 19 after a shock therapy in the army, because we had to go to the army. That's a reminder, and you know, I have in my DNA, so to say, the feeling of reversibility of everything we have achieved. And of course, the first thing that censorship attacks is not even content, but is the space, and it's exactly that private space. So the transgression is actually to think, and in the sense that to think is you're making the space, the social space to think, and if you've done that, you're already an enemy. Hence, these kinds of extreme responses, and as I said, it's a little bit different than in Poland because Romania had a less structured opposition. So you wouldn't probably have in Poland such events like in, this is not so important, but just an illustration. Doru Viorel Ursu, a man who was basically killed in torture because he was writing a journal, and with no intention of publishing it. They just found it in his house. He didn't make any attempt to mail it outside. So, and then reversing back to the rest of the discussion, I wrote down Wcieniu Jaty. I haven't read the books. The interesting thing is a lot of the knowledge about, for instance, the dates of the show in Nuremberg and the dates of that meeting with the Minister of Culture and the Ambassador. We get these really late, because publishing catches up with events with a 40-year lag, and the extent of this lag is, when it comes to the events it's referring to, is sometimes even deeper than that. Somebody in Poland asked me to review before publishing a book about Romanian art and art history way back 800 years ago, and I realized I don't know it. I was completely incompetent to review it because, for instance, I didn't know that there were notable Hungarian 13th century churches in Romania, because I had a guy sick with nationalism teaching art history, and I was sort of shut off while he was, repeating like a mantra that all the churches in Romania have the apsis semicircular at the interior and polygonal at the exterior as a proof that they are Orthodox, and they never were otherwise, so this knowledge about this period and the publications hit us with such immense delay that they actually even impeded us understanding ourselves. So, yeah.
What you just said about space reminds me, and you were talking about Shubing, we could easily draw the Chinese situation during the Cultural Revolution into that, like the apartment movement in Hong Kong. And when Shubing found himself also doing the kinds of exercises you're talking about, doing these so-called big posters, where he's writing propaganda, what he realizes against his own father. I mean, this is very weird situations like that. Now he's president of the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing, so I don't know, there's been a lot that happened between then and now, but I'm not well versed enough in the Chinese situation in particular, but to make more granular comparisons. But it's exactly what you're talking about. This, the privacy assertion of privacy is the political act, and the space is the clamping down on the space, in the way that you torture somebody, basically. Anyway, on that cheerful note. What are there other comments? Because I know Wojciech is going to. Do you want to speak now, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think I'm obliged to say something in the end of our conference. However, my head is full of anecdotes that probably it's only wise thing I can say. Maybe it's only one. Caroline mentioned the problem of vernacular art in Central or Central Eastern Europe. I remember my meeting with Dora Wibbenson in Krakow 15 years ago. We walked through the Florianska Street to the marketplace, and she saw the higher tower of St. Mary Church with this typical spire, and she told me, "Oh, how vernacular." Yes. Okay. So I think it was a very good conference, and we touched many subjects, many elements of the problem of dematerialization. And I would like to thank you all for the presence here and for your fantastic paper. We are going to publish it, and we ask you polite to send us the papers till the end of July, because we must publish it in the next year, because our project ends in the next year, and it is the only possibility to have money to pay for the publication. I would like to add two short comments to the problem of dematerialization. In the article of Lucy Lippard, this first article, which he wrote with John Chandler in 1967, they quoted John Cage, who in a lecture said that what he done, it was a dematerialization of intentions. I must say, I haven't understood what does it mean, but now I had a revelation that if we connect this with the phenomenological aesthetics of Roman garden, we can say that if we see the materialization connected to intentions, we can interpret it so that the materialization of the core of the problem is that the materialization of the intentional object, which is concretized by the viewer when he looks at the picture. And if something disappeared, like in this telepathic piece by Robert Berry, there is no possibility to concretize the event. And maybe it is one side of the dematerialization. There is no intentional object, aesthetic object to reconstruct, to do in the process of viewing. Another one problem of dematerialization is connected with the question, what remains after dematerialization? And it was Jacques Derrida who said that after what remains after the dematerialization is probably chora, also space, warmth, this Platonic term. Chora is also diaphanous, and so something what is transparent. it is transparent. It is transparent, but it is not a kind of void, but probably it is a basic space for potentiality. And maybe on the other side, the dematerialization is the place or the moment where the potential or virtual aspect of artwork can appear. So that's all what I can say to you. Thank you very much. We meet at 2 o'clock on the last lunch together. You can collect your things now and after the dinner, after the lunch. So